The spirit claimed to be a lost family member. It answered personal questions. It comforted a grieving grandmother. For weeks, everything seemed innocent. But then one question exposed the truth. The entity behind the board wasn't family at all, and when it finally revealed its real intentions, the lights exploded, the room went dark, and something terrifying tried to come through. Tonight on Taka Tales, this is the chilling story of the fake grandfather, a true horror encounter that proves not every spirit is who it claims to be. Ashley spent much of her childhood at her grandmother's aging house, a quiet place tucked away on a peaceful street where very little seemed to change. It was the kind of home that felt frozen in another era. The wallpaper had begun to fade with time. Family photographs covered nearly every wall, and the wooden floors groaned softly beneath each step. During the day, sunlight streamed through lace curtains, giving the house a warm and comforting glow. But when evening arrived and shadows stretched across the rooms, the house took on a completely different feeling, one that Ashley could never quite explain. As a child, she loved visiting her grandmother. The house was filled with stories, old keepsakes, and memories from generations past. Every object seemed to have a history attached to it. There were dusty photo albums stacked on shelves, antique clocks ticking steadily in quiet hallways, and framed portraits of relatives Ashley had never met. Her grandmother knew the story behind every photograph and every piece of furniture. She could spend hours talking about the past, sharing memories that made long-gone family members feel alive again. Yet beneath all those stories was a sadness that never truly disappeared. Long before Ashley was born, her grandmother had experienced a devastating tragedy. She had lost a baby boy during childbirth. The child was stillborn, never taking his first breath, never opening his eyes to see the world. The loss shattered her. Although decades had passed since that heartbreaking day, the pain remained hidden just beneath the surface. Time had softened the wound, but it had never healed it completely. Ashley occasionally caught glimpses of that grief. Sometimes she would find her grandmother sitting alone in the living room, staring quietly at an old black-and-white photograph. Other times, she would notice tears forming in her eyes when conversations drifted toward family history. Her grandmother rarely spoke openly about the son she had lost, but his absence seemed to linger in the house like a ghost. It was as though a piece of the family story had been left unfinished. As Ashley grew older, she began to understand that some losses never truly leave us. They become part of who we are, shaping our lives in ways we don't always recognize. For her grandmother, the memory of her lost son remained as vivid as ever. She often wondered what he would have looked like, what kind of person he might have become, and what life would have been like if he had survived. Neither Ashley nor her grandmother could have imagined that this decades-old grief would soon lead them toward a terrifying encounter, one that would change both of their lives forever. The day everything began was cold, gray, and drenched in rain. Outside, dark clouds rolled across the sky, while raindrops tapped steadily against the windows of Ashley's grandmother's house. The atmosphere felt strangely calm, almost peaceful, as if the world itself had slowed down. Ashley was spending another quiet afternoon at her grandmother's home, sitting at the kitchen table while they shared tea and looked through old family photo albums. As they turned page after page, stories from the past filled the room. Smiling faces, holiday gatherings, and faded memories appeared in every photograph. But Ashley noticed that whenever her grandmother reached a certain section of the album, her expression changed. Her smile faded, her eyes became distant, and an unmistakable sadness settled over her face. After a long silence, her grandmother gently closed the album and rested her hand on its worn cover. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said something that would change everything. "I think there might be a way to talk to him." Ashley looked up, confused at first. She knew exactly who her grandmother meant. The son she had lost before Ashley was ever born. The child who had never taken his first breath. Her grandmother explained that she had heard stories about people communicating with loved ones who had passed away. According to those stories, spirit boards could act as a bridge between the living and the dead, allowing messages to pass from one side to the other. Ashley listened with curiosity. She was young, fascinated by ghost stories, and had heard of Ouija boards before. To her, the idea sounded mysterious and exciting rather than dangerous. Her grandmother spoke carefully, almost as if she were afraid someone else might overhear the conversation. There was a fragile hope in her voice, a hope Ashley had rarely seen before. For decades, she had carried the pain of losing her son. Now, for the first time, she seemed to believe there might be a chance to hear from him. They didn't own a real Ouija board, but that didn't stop them from discussing the possibility. Her grandmother suggested making one themselves. It seemed harmless enough. Just a simple experiment driven by curiosity and love. Neither of them stopped to consider what could happen if something actually answered. Years later, Ashley would look back on that rainy afternoon and realize that grief can make people vulnerable in ways they don't understand. When the heart desperately longs for a familiar voice, it becomes easy to ignore the possibility that something else might answer the call. That evening, they gathered supplies from around the house. Using a large sheet of paper, they carefully drew the alphabet in a circle. Numbers were added beneath the letters. Yes and no occupied opposite corners, while goodbye sat at the bottom. For a planchette, they used the underside of an old compact disc. The reflective surface glided easily across the paper. Once complete, the homemade board looked surprisingly convincing. They placed it on the dining room table and lit a candle nearby. The room suddenly felt different. The shadows seemed deeper. Every creak from the old house sounded louder than before. Still, excitement outweighed fear. Ashley's grandmother hoped for a miracle. Ashley hoped for an adventure. Neither realized they were preparing a doorway rather than a conversation. At first, nothing happened. Ashley's grandmother placed her fingers on the CD and waited patiently. Minutes passed without movement. Frustrated, she asked Ashley to try instead. The moment Ashley rested her fingertips lightly on the disc, it shifted. Both froze. Slowly, the CD glided toward a letter, then another. The movement felt smooth and deliberate. Questions were asked cautiously. The responses seemed intelligent. The entity claimed to be the stillborn son. Ashley's grandmother immediately became emotional. Tears formed in her eyes as decades of grief suddenly transformed into hope. For the first time in years, she felt connected to the child she had lost. Ashley watched the board move in disbelief. What began as curiosity quickly became something deeply personal for both of them. Over the following weeks, the sessions became a routine. Every visit followed the same pattern. The lights were dimmed. The candle was lit. The board was placed on the dining room table. The spirit answered questions consistently. It described itself as peaceful and happy. It reassured Ashley's grandmother that he watched over the family. The responses felt innocent and childlike. Ashley began to view the spirit almost like a younger brother she had never known. Her grandmother became increasingly attached. She smiled more often after each session. The entity always seemed patient, kind, and understanding. Looking back, Ashley believes that was exactly the point. Whatever was communicating through the board wasn't rushing. It was earning their trust. It was learning about them while revealing almost nothing about itself. Eventually, small details started to feel wrong. The answers became shorter. The board moved more aggressively than before. Sometimes the spirit contradicted things it had said in earlier sessions. Ashley noticed the room felt colder whenever they used the board. The candle flame flickered violently, despite closed windows and still air. Strange noises echoed through the house at night. Doors creaked open without explanation. Shadows seemed to linger just a little longer than they should. Ashley tried to ignore these signs. Her grandmother did the same. Neither wanted to lose the connection they believed they had found. The possibility that the spirit might not be who it claimed to be was too painful to consider. So they continued, unknowingly allowing the deception to deepen. As weeks turned into months, Ashley noticed a growing sense of unease. Even when the board wasn't present, she felt as though someone was observing her. Walking through hallways alone became uncomfortable. Certain rooms felt unnaturally heavy. Her grandmother experienced similar feelings but rarely discussed them. The atmosphere inside the house changed noticeably. Guests occasionally commented that the home felt strange. Pets avoided specific corners of certain rooms. Yet every time they sat at the board, the spirit returned with familiar answers. It continued presenting itself as family. That consistency made the warning signs easier to dismiss. Fear and comfort existed side by side. The entity had woven itself into their lives so gradually that neither recognized how deeply it had embedded itself. One evening, the atmosphere felt different from the start. The dining room seemed unusually cold. Ashley felt uneasy before even touching the board. The candlelight cast long shadows across the walls. When she placed her fingers on the CD, the movement was immediate. But it wasn't gentle anymore. The planchette jerked sharply between letters. The responses felt hostile. Ashley's grandmother asked familiar questions, hoping for reassurance. Instead, the answers became confusing and evasive. The spirit no longer sounded like the child they believed they knew. Every response increased the tension. Ashley's instincts screamed that something was wrong. The comforting presence that had accompanied previous sessions was gone. In its place was something older, darker, and far more intelligent. Unable to ignore her growing fear, Ashley decided to ask a direct question. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Are you really my uncle?" The room fell silent. The CD immediately moved. Slowly, letter by letter, it spelled a single word, "No." Ashley felt her stomach drop. Her grandmother gasped in shock. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Ashley asked another question. "Who are you?" The response came instantly. The planchette glided with unsettling confidence. It spelled out a message neither would ever forget. "I have him." The meaning was horrifying. Whatever had been communicating through the board claimed it wasn't their lost relative. Worse, it implied that the real spirit was trapped or controlled somehow. The mask had finally slipped. Fear filled the room. Ashley's hands shook uncontrollably. Her grandmother sat frozen in disbelief. Before either could react, the board continued moving. The message wasn't finished. Letter after letter appeared beneath their fingertips. "I am taking you too." The words seemed to echo through the room long after the movement stopped. Ashley felt a crushing pressure in her chest. The air became heavy and difficult to breathe. Every instinct told her to run. The comforting illusion was gone. Whatever sat on the other side of that board had finally revealed its intentions. It had spent weeks earning their trust only to expose its true nature at the perfect moment. The threat felt personal, deliberate, and terrifyingly real. Moments after the threat appeared, Ashley felt overwhelming dizziness. The room spun violently around her. Her vision blurred and faded. For a few terrifying seconds, everything went black. When she regained awareness, she was still seated at the table. Then, a deafening explosion shattered the silence. The dining room light bulb burst overhead, raining glass across the room. The candle extinguished instantly. Darkness swallowed everything. Ashley's grandmother screamed. Chairs scraped across the floor as they stumbled backward. The atmosphere felt electric, charged with an invisible presence. Both sensed they were no longer alone. Fear overwhelmed reason. They didn't stop to investigate. Survival instincts took over. They knew only one thing for certain. Whatever had answered through that board was still there. Ashley grabbed the homemade board and tore it apart. Her grandmother handed her the CD planchette. With trembling hands, she snapped it in half. They carried every piece outside and burned them in the backyard. Flames consumed the paper quickly, rising higher than expected. Neither spoke as they watched the fire. They simply wanted the nightmare to end. Although the board was gone, strange experiences continued for days afterward. Unexplained sounds echoed through the house. Both women felt watched, especially at night. Eventually, the disturbances faded, but the memory never did. Ashley learned a lesson she would never forget. Not every spirit is who it claims to be. Some entities wear familiar faces because trust is the easiest way inside. What do you think was really communicating through that homemade board? A demon? A trickster spirit? Or something even darker? Let us know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this terrifying true encounter, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more chilling stories from Taka Tales. Until next time, stay safe and be careful what answers when you call into the darkness.